And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 24. 2 dozen down already, who'd have thought? Packed evening this evening. I'm going to be starting off. I'm going to be talking about pictures I did for Pip and Ell, who are local jewellers. You set up their business during lockdown. Let's just show you. Oh, wrong one. That happens quite a lot. And where are we? Yep, there we go. So we'll be talking about this photo shoot that we did, including a little bit of behind the scenes video as well. What we'll also be looking at is in the critique section, Gary wants to know this is a favourite photo of his, but it never seems to do quite as well in the competitions as he feels that it ought to, and is wanting a little bit of feedback on why that might be. Then we have Prasad, who taking this picture in Austria, was wondering if there's other ways he could have edited it to have a little bit more impact. We'll also be looking at Fiji. Well, she took this lovely photo of her father, but again is wondering about ways it could be improved, perhaps through the editing. We will also be looking at Graham's picture of Windermere. He was there, took the photo, but knows that it doesn't really capture what he wanted it to. So we'll be looking at that, and then finally I'll be talking about this photo, a set of photos that Stephen did, getting very cinematic and theatrical, but he was wanting to know how to make the pictures look a bit more cinematic in their editing. So these are the pictures I'm going to be looking at tonight. And so to kick off, this is Facebook Live, and if you find this useful, if you would like to contribute, support these podcasts, then do go to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres for donations. It's not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. And leave comments. Yes, please leave comments. It's always, I won't read them absolutely live as I go, because if things are coming up on the screen as I'm trying to talk, I get distracted even more than usual. So, but I do periodically check in just to see if anybody's here. So let me know who you are, where you're from, and if you have any questions, if you have any comments, then leave them in the comments, and I will catch up with you as we go. Right, I think that's pretty much about the intros out of the way. So let's talk then about Pip and Ell. So let me flip back over here and stick this photo up, as being one of the sort of key photos that we did. So essentially, Piper and Ella Booth, or in this case, as you read from left to right, Ella and Piper Booth, set up during lockdown, set up a little kind of homemade makeshift jewellery business using polymer clay to create bold, strong patterns and earrings. Started off the kind of thing they would make for themselves, and then they started making them for other people, and before they knew it, a little business started growing. Now, I've sort of known the girls on and off over the years. Piper, so when she was, she was a friend of my daughter's, Meg, from primary school. Now both grown young women. Ella is studying medicine up in Dundee. Piper has recently graduated with a degree in English literature. But during lockdown, they set up this business. Now, I suppose for me, really what happened was I was starting to get a bit, during lockdown, I'm kind of been getting a bit missing doing the photography. The kind of photography that I love doing, which is stage, set scenes, interacting with people. Obviously, there's not been a huge amount of that going on. Social distancing, weather, because it means we have to do it outside. Just the general move of the sort of climate of business meant that kind of work there hasn't been a lot of. And I miss it. This is the kind of thing I really love doing. So I saw Piper and Ella had set up Pip and Ell jewellery. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe I could just do a shoot with them, just just a bit of fun, see whether they'd be interested. So I phoned their dad, Adam Booth, who's a artist blacksmith who I've known for many years. Asked if he thought they might be up for it. He wasn't too sure, thought possibly not, but he'd have a wee word with them. Anyway, it turned out they were delighted to give it a go. So we started video chat and started bouncing ideas. Now, one of the things that I often do with clients is I'll set up a Pinterest board. It's a great way of getting to get a feel for what a client wants. So sometimes when you're doing these shoots, the client knows exactly what they want, and that's great. That makes life an awful lot easier. Very often they don't. They have half an idea or no idea. And at that point, to use Pinterest, what you do is you set up a board, a shared board, and you get the clients to start pinning images that they like. And quite often you start to discover that certain themes start recurring. In fact, actually, what I can do here is just briefly show you Pinterest board that we were, that one, playing with. So the first ideas started off with lots of pictures of a very kind of crowded room with lots of pictures on the wall. And we started off thinking about the idea of creating a room which looked like a kind of creative room full of pictures stuck around the walls and table full of paintbrushes and all that kind of thing. Didn't do that quite right. Where are we? Yeah, photo shoot ideas. But as it went, the pictures that started building up, I started to find a lot more in the way of these sort of block colour kind of things. I've obviously not quite got the hang of how to go back to the page that I want to be on. I'll not click on anything more. But you can see here that I've just gone and done it again. How do I get back? No. I have to keep hitting that back button. Right, okay. As the pictures develop, strong senses of bold block colours started to develop. A couple of ideas of pictures like Tim Walker, where you end up with supersized props, shots from low angles, and these then all started feeding into the direction that we wanted to go in. So we had several meetings via Pinterest, and so we had several meetings via video. Discussed what we were going to do, and started thinking about the idea of using the garden as a place to do the shoot. And then what the girls decided they would do would be make up these sort of giant props out of cardboard, paint them in the sort of strong, bold colours that they used to make their earrings, and sort of hang them from bits of wire and running off step ladders and everything else. Anyway, it all sounded like a lot of fun. We decided to go for it. And we ended up with a whole bunch of different photos. So just I'll run through a few of these as one of the Ella and Piper together. And here you can see the flashes in the background going off. Got Piper on her own, and Ella, and a couple at the table. But you can see, although we were outdoors, I'm still using off-camera flashes. I've still got lights either side because it does add an extra layer of light to the thing. So here's behind the scenes pictures where you can see things getting set up. And over on the left there we have Holly, who did some filming for us. And in fact, in a minute I'll show you behind the scenes video that we created for it. And there's a good picture of Holly under the same thing. Come back to that afterwards. Okay, so tell you what, let's go for that then. So here's a video. It's only about a minute and a half, thereabouts. So what we've got here, can see a couple of intro pictures. Girls cutting out the cardboard, undercoating, getting the paint going. What was great was they were, creating the shapes and using the colours very similar to the earrings that they make. Then they've got all these wires set up, hanging them up. So all this was happening before I turned up. They were busy building the set, deciding what was going to go on it, and you see a couple of examples of our earrings there. So then I arrived, and after a cup of coffee and a chat about what we were going to do, started setting up the lights. Used a step ladder to get that shot from above, and you can see here. And what I've got a wide angle lens on, which is helping to kind of create more of a sense of space and even distort some of the images at the edges. So, I kind of go down, really kind of lying on the floor, looking up, in order to get that wide angle, sort of slightly off kilter kind of feel to it that you can see here. It makes it much more interesting than just doing a straight on kind of shot. You can see from the lighting, we've got the light that's coming in from the left here is catching the edge of Ella and giving her a bit. There's the light that is behind Piper, which is kind of giving her a little bit of a glow around the hair. So these lights are helping to separate out from the background. So that's the kind of behind the scenes. It was a lot of fun doing the shoot. What's lovely is the enthusiasm and commitment with which Piper and Ella really threw themselves into creating the photo. We wanted to just try and really create something that was going to be fun, and when I came to editing, you could see the pictures are very vibrant. So it's well, and then what happened was I thought, well, okay, there's a great story here with Piper and Ella having set up their own business, and we've now got some great photos. So I got in contact with Andrea of Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine, see if she might be interested in this for the magazine, and she was. So I sent her the photos, and in this month's October version, which is just come out now, if we flip back, you can now see the pictures. Got a wonderful 3-page article with the pictures and a lovely write-up about what the girls are up to. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, considering that we're all stuck in lockdown. The great thing about doing an outdoor garden shoot was we were able to stay socially distanced properly and still get some really fun, interesting photos. Of course, it did help that we've had there's been some rather wet patches over the summer, but we've had some really nice dry spells as well. So I thought that was probably worth chatting about. So what I'll do now is I'll flick over to Facebook and see whether we have any comments. And we do. Right, so Stacey, good afternoon. Kim here from Pennsylvania. Welcome, Stacey. Glad to see you got here. Gary from the High Peak District. Hi, Gary. Glad you made it along. You see, we're talking about one of your photos in a little bit. Terry, think I missed last week. Smoke in Washington messes everything up. Yeah, lots of stuff going on in the world. Glad you could make it back though, Terry. Becca, evening from Norwich. Okay, that's great, Norwich. Maggie, that's my wife. Good evening, everyone. Stacey, looks like she's replying to Terry there. I have a friend who lives up in Washington State, and she showed the sky in the area, and also have friends in California who are dealing with the smoke. VG, good afternoon, Kim. Hi, VG. Glad you could make it. Looking at one of your photos later as well. VG also says, creating Pinterest boards seems to me a brilliant idea. Ideas evolve. Yep, they absolutely do. And it is really, I kind of can't recommend it highly enough. If you're trying to develop an idea, mood boards, mood boards have been around for decades, if not centuries. it probably is centuries. I mean, a lot of, if you consider preliminary sketches of what the old masters were doing, you're sort of bouncing ideas, but you're looking for colour schemes, you're looking for thoughts and ideas. One of the things I find with, is it is this thing that when I say to clients, well, okay, start posting images, you quite often find that very quickly certain themes start repeating. You find that this client is really into purples and greens, or this client is really into reds and golds, or this client is into pink and fluffy, or this client is into dark film noir expressionist shadowing. And when you start getting these themes repeating, it then becomes much easier to then sit down and talk with them and start coming up with an idea for the photo shoot, which they're really going to love because they've already been showing you that part of their kind of imagination, which makes it much easier to then move forward. As we go, oh, Poppy says hello. Hi, Poppy. Poppy's my granddaughter, so that's lovely to see you. Glad you could make it along. Okay, well, that's lovely. It's always good to know that there's people here watching on Pinterest. So what we're going to do now then is move on to the critique section. Now, for those who are new or those who aren't totally sure what's going on, for the critique section, basically what happens is I have a Facebook group called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, goes along with the title. And you can join the group, and then if you want, you can post images. And the images that they need to be ones that you've taken, but basically every photographer gets a bit stuck at some point or another with their photos. You can take a photo and for whatever reason, it isn't doing what you want it to. And sometimes it's really difficult to understand what we're doing wrong or what our blind spots are. And at that point, having somebody else to cast a second eye on it can be really, really useful. The problem is when we just put it up on Facebook, generally speaking, what tends to happen is everybody clicks like. Everybody's being complimentary. Nobody really wants to tell us if something's gone wrong. And if people think it's seriously hideous, they don't tend to say, they just don't like. Sometimes they can like it even if they don't actually like it, but they're just trying to be encouraging. So we can end up with a very false sense of what we're capable of. We put up something fairly mediocre or even not very good, we got lots of likes and we think it's okay. But at the back of our head, it's nagging us. We know the photo isn't really good. So what do we do next? So this corner of the internet, I decided to set up specifically to deal with this. So if you're interested, join the group and put your photos in, and then I keep aside this section of the podcast specifically to look at and give feedback to images that have been submitted. So tonight I've got 5 different images to go through, and like I say, if you find this useful and you would like to support the podcast, then do go to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Now, the first image I think I'm going to pull up tonight is, I think we'll look at Gary from the High Peak District. And let's see, let's pull this one across. And Gary says, "This is a panorama I took at Surprise View in the High Peak District, Derbyshire. It was a dark, dank, misty morning, which was perfect as I was looking for images to add to my project on Gothic landscapes." So I asked him to give me a little bit more feedback on what it was he was where he felt he was stuck with this. He says it's mostly around the following: the trees and their branches, are they clearly defined enough, or is the mist losing too much clarity? I wanted to create an air of mystery, but don't want a blurred or obscure image. Is the foreground too dark and lacking sufficient interest? Could it be brightened? There's virtually no detail in the sky because of the mist. Is this a bad thing? So all the questions at this point from Gary are technical. Could I have lightened this, darkened this, sharpened that, blurred that? And then he goes on, which I thought was much more kind of revealing, as that's full disclosure, I personally love this image. What I created is what I envisaged when I first came across this grove of trees. Not being content with that, I have entered it into at least 6 minor competitions in appropriate classes, and it does absolutely nothing. It's causing me to question my approach. Is it just the case that my taste and aesthetic isn't necessarily shared by others? If that's the case, then fair enough. However, if I'm doing something technically wrong, I'd like to know what it is. So, this is extraordinarily common. We take a photo which we are so pleased with, we are absolutely chuffed to bits with it, and we show it to the world, and we don't get the response we want. Or maybe, fine, on Facebook we get lots of likes, but we want to go beyond that. So we put it in for competitions, whether it's online competitions or competitions with your local camera club or whatever, and we feel really pleased with it because it really does it for us. And yet it's tumbleweeds drifting past in terms of response. Never gets anywhere. And that kind of thing can knock your confidence. You think, well, is the photo any good? Is it just a matter of taste, which it very often is? Or have I screwed up on the technical side and just not noticed something? Well, couple of things here really to talk about, Gary. The first thing is if you like it, that absolutely is the main point of it. Now, running on the back of that, I have to say the part of the problem that is, so whilst you go for, what did you say, a sort of gothic feel, gothic landscapes, I can understand that. So you've got mist, it's black and white, it's moody. The problem here is not everybody shares that aesthetic. And there's no doubt, and you go to certain online sites, there are online sites like Guru Shots or Photo Crowd or Viewbug, various others, I think 500 Pics does them as well, where you have hundreds or thousands of people entering daily competitions. And then everybody's judging them as well. And what you're ending up with here is mass judging. And very often what happens with that is bright and colourful trumps dark and moody. And it's not to say that the bright and colourful images are necessarily better, but if you just go out into the street and you randomly grabbed 100 people and you showed them a bright and colourful picture and you showed them a dark and moody picture, more people would go for the bright and colourful. It's much like music, I think, where you tend to find a lot of people are drawn to the bright major keys and bright, friendly, feel-good music, and a lot of people are drawn to the more melancholic minor keys. And if you are into minor key music, if you are into the sort of sad and melancholic and moody music, then it clutches your heartstrings so much that you can't imagine why anybody else would ever want anything sort of poppy and pappy. And so, and yet the charts are full of the kind of music that's full of bright, you occasionally get, dramatic, heartfelt music, but most of it tends to be sort of bright and cheerful. And it's similar with photography. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the photo is wrong. It can just mean that the audience is wrong, that there are other people out there who would love this kind of photography. It's just your photo doesn't happen to be sitting in front of them. So a lot does depend on what competitions you're putting them into. Now, having said that, to move on to the technicals a bit. There is detail in here, and I must say, actually, I think with this, the other thing about this picture is I imagine that it would look good printed and printed big. You want this printed A2, A1, A0 or bigger. It's a landscape you've stitched. I think you told me you stitched 7. Yeah, it held 7 handheld vertical shots stitched together, right? So it's going to be very high resolution. It can stand being printed up really large, and I think it would look great under those conditions. On the screen, you're kind of squashing in a bit, so you're not getting the same, when we sort of zoom in here, there's some lovely detailing on the tree, these silver birch here. We've got layers on them, I've zoomed in that far, and that's a nice picture. You could just crop that, and that becomes quite a nice picture in its own right. So, whereas you would see that on a big printed image, when it's this big, And I'm seeing this on a 24-inch screen. Some people who are watching this now will be watching it on tablets. Some will even be watching them on phones, which are 4 or 5 inches wide. You are not going to get the impact of this picture. So again, where it's being judged makes a difference. However, there is a technical thing that I came across when I'd started zooming in, which I didn't notice on the smaller version. And that is, while it's rather beautifully stitched together in the middle, I wouldn't know where one line, you say you've got 7 here. As I come over to the edge, suddenly, look at this. We have, it's sharp on the right and blurred on the left. And initially I just thought this was more fog in the background, but it isn't. Obviously what's happened, and it just poof, there's no gentle blending of this. There's just a really hard line. And that makes me feel it's not been stitched together properly. But then if it's not just the trees. If I look down even here, you're not going to really see it because it's quite dark here, but all the heather in the foreground, which is nice and sharp in the middle, over on the left-hand side of the picture, is completely out of focus. And then if I go over to the right-hand side, we have exactly the same problem. That is nice and sharp in the middle 5 images that have been stuck together, and then suddenly it's blurred. It's as though when you did your 7 pictures, the ones on either end focused in a different place. And it's quite possible they would, because the middle 5, if we divided this approximately into 7, the middle 5 of these, the camera is going to autofocus on the trees. Almost wherever you point it, it's going to hit a bit of branch. But when you get to the outsides here, there isn't a lot for it to grab hold of, so it's probably just focused on the foreground. Similarly on the left. And then when you've stitched it together, so at that point what happens is we've lost the illusion of it being a single photo. The stitching together is a great thing, and Photoshop and other editing software can do these kind of things. But if you can see the edits, you immediately stop looking at it as a photo. You stop looking at it as something which is evoking an emotion, and you start noticing the edits. It's like if you're watching a film and the editing suddenly jumps in a way that feels uncomfortable, then you stop being immersed in the film and you suddenly become aware that you're watching something. You lose that suspension of disbelief. So on an editing side, Gary, you really, I would say, get those bits sorted out. Go back and check through your images and make sure that the images at either end of your selection are focused in the same place that the central 5 are. And I know if you've been entering this picture into anything like a camera club type competition, ones where they really hammer you if you don't have the technicals right, then I would say that's where you would get hammered. The moment somebody noticed that it goes blurred at the edges rather than just fading out, they would pick up on that and not like it at all. Other than that, like I say, I mean, as a concept, I like it. Certainly, I can imagine being out there on the moorland, foggy, doing exactly what you do and feeling well chuffed if I ended up with a photo like that. A lot of it will be taste. But like I say, there's also how you show it, which is, if this was printed up big, this would look great. Although, if you didn't sort out the sides, if you printed up big, it would then look funny on either side because it goes out of focus. But assuming you got those bits sorted out, I think this would look fantastic if it was sort of printed up large. It's never going to translate as well on a small screen. And again, where you're showing your photos, there's understanding the audience and how the audience are going to be seeing it. If it's on one of these online competitions where people are scrolling through hundreds and hundreds of photos to vote on, then subtlety gets lost. And so knowing where to place your photo, which kind of competition, who's going to be looking at it, will make a difference. And it is one of those things that you can't, it isn't necessarily whether the photo is inherently good or bad. It's partly taste, it's partly how it's being seen. But there is the technical thing of the blurred edges. So I hope that gives you some really some decent feedback, a bit of insight, and you find fairly useful. Okay, thanks for that, Gary. Okay, let's take a little bit flip back, see if we have any more comments in the room. Stacy, I've saved Pinterest files to get ideas on photography because I do a lot of craft projects. Yeah, Pinterest is it's really handy for developing your own stuff. And Gary, I've been coming to this conclusion myself about black and white versus bright colours. Okay, yeah, that was a few minutes ago. And Stacey, I agree, sometimes it's the audience. I feel that some aren't qualified to judge. It is a tricky one, who's qualified to judge a picture? And in a way, we don't get to say. Now, okay, it's one thing, if you are putting it into a specific competition, a high prestige competition where the judges are all learned people in photography, then yes, they are going to be judging a whole bunch of different criteria. General public, do they have a right to judge your photography? Well, tough, they do. If you put your picture into an online forum for people to look at and to judge, it gets judged. And we can get annoyed that, our brilliantly crafted, fantastically honed photo, edited to perfection, isn't doing very well, and someone's clumsy photo of a cat or kitten that's a bit out of focus is doing really well because it's got the emotional hit rather than the technical expertise. But kind of that's the way the world is. I don't think it's right to. I don't think we can really sit on our high horse and slam people for not liking our work. I think what we have to do is we have to find the right audience for our work, because it doesn't matter what you do. Some people are going to like it and some people are not. If I took slightly out of focus pictures of kittens but they looked cute, I'm sure I could get a lot of likes for them. Now, I wouldn't win camera club competitions with them, but I could do very well on the online competition. Certain websites where that kind of thing will do really well. So it's about really knowing your audience. Now, if you have a desire to pursue excellence in photography, then hang around in the places where excellence in photography is valued. And that's the real key thing, where you're placing it again. I can shove up my, I've talked before many times, I can shove up my most honed, most planned, my favourite photo ever, the photo that took 6 months in the planning, 2 days in the execution, 3 weeks in the editing. I think it's the masterpiece of all masterpieces, and I'll get 20 likes on Facebook. I put up a quick selfie of me and my daughter having a cup of coffee in a cafe. I get over 200. Does that mean the photo I took of my daughter in the cafe is a superior quality photo? No, what it means is the audience for Facebook is acting on a social level, not on a learned photography critique level. So there's no point in me getting upset if my photo isn't doing well on Facebook, because in the end, Facebook, generally speaking, isn't my audience. But it is the audience for selfies with my daughter. So understanding where you place your images and understanding who's judging them, I think really helps then in terms of your own self-confidence, because this is the problem. We put the photo in the wrong place, get the wrong kind of judgments, and then we beat ourselves up because we didn't get the response we wanted. So understanding that, I think, is really key to moving forward. So anyway, thanks for that point, Stacey, because it has just sort of made me raise that point. Okay, so what have we got? Gary, I don't mind if people don't like my pictures, it's the indifference I hate. Well, yeah. Stacey, I agree. Yes, I've seen an animal competition and bugs which are not animals, but I've seen them win on competition. Okay, well, there's variations on how people decide to interpret things. That's for sure. I mean, I've seen black and white competitions where people put in things with a little bit of colour in, and somehow they will still get well, but they don't usually win. Stephen says, I found judges can pick up on things you can improve while admitting that the image is not their cup of tea. Well, yeah, hopefully, Stephen, you're right. And that's what I'm trying to do here as well, which is, I think there's a couple of times, several times actually, over the last few months, I've had people sort of put images in the Understanding Photography Facebook page and say, what do you think of this? And the answer isn't really, that's not about what I think of the photo. It's what you think of the photo and where you feel it's problematic. And then, hopefully, I can use my skills to help you get past what you feel is problematic. And those who've sort of watched this regularly will know that sometimes pictures come up and I say, if you were pursuing this story, you could edit it this way, but if you were pursuing that story, you could edit it a different way. So it's not about the actual photo, it's about how you decide to approach what you're going to do with that photo. So it isn't about my opinion, whether I like it or I don't like it. What I'm trying to help you here with is, if you were chasing something, if you were pursuing an idea, how can you pursue that idea better? So, okay, quite a little bit of chat there. Hope you found that interesting. So let's move on to the next photo. So what I'm going to move on to next is, what have we got? Prasad. Okay, so now he sent a couple of different images. I will be here all night if I do all of them, so I'll just grab one for the moment. And okay, let's flick back. So what he's done is he's sent me this picture below, pictures taken in Prague and Vienna, Nikon compact digital camera. How can I edit these pictures best? I've slightly edited the first one. So this was the one that he's added, Prasad has edited. Okay. Now, you sent me the edited version. Unfortunately, I don't know what the unedited version was, so what you've cropped out and what you've kept in. Sometimes, if you're sending me an image, it does help if you can send me an unedited version as well, and then that gives me an idea of what it is you were trying to pursue. So what we've got here then is we've got a photo taken in Austria, and it's just in what's commonly known as the blue hour, which is the sort of hour or so after the sun has set, or the hour or so before the sun has risen. And this is in contrast to the golden hour, which is the hour or so before sunset or after sunrise, when everything has a golden hue. This is the point where the sun's gone down, but it's not completely dark yet. And if you are doing city scenes, town scenes, scenes where there's street lights, it's quite often a good time to do these kind of urban type shoots, because you get the street lights have come on, so you get a lovely kind of the yellow and the orange of the street lights, but you've also got the kind of blue tinge of the sky. So there's a kind of nice colour palette to play around with. The sky isn't completely black, you've still got texture in it. So Prasad taken this photo and is wanting to know, are there ways of sort of improving it a bit, or other ways it could have been edited. What I would say here, the immediate feeling for this is that what you have is, the thing that immediately grabs the attention is the set of buildings up on the top here. And I think, if we just, just as you can kind of see on the screen there, you could almost crop it like that and you've got an interesting photo. However, you've not zoomed in on this. What you've done is you've come back. So you've brought the river into play and you've got the sky into play. Now, the problem with this is it means that where the action is happening is all happening in a narrow strip in the middle. There's not a lot happening in the sky, or rather there's a large expanse of sky and there's a large expanse of water. But there's not enough going on in either of them to take the attention. So in a way, you could either, it's a bit like Gary's idea, take 7 images and stitch them all together and create a kind of strong panoramic. something like that. And you can immediately see by cutting out the excess above and below, now the picture feels fuller. There's more going on in it. And there isn't actually more going on, it's just we've removed the bits where there wasn't anything going on. However, it is a very, very letterbox kind of feel to it. Now, traditionally what I would say, if you were going down the rule of thirds style of thing, whereby what you want to do is you want to sort of divide the picture into three. Now, in a way, you've already got the lit up buildings are a third of the way across from the right. And that helps, you know, that rather than it being dead center. But it's sitting in this center line. So the first thing to do, maybe playing around with, is what you could either do. You could either sort of crop it up here so that actually what we do is we remove most of the river, and then that is sort of sitting, and then we've got the sky. Or you do it the other way around. Oh, what's happened here? Go back to open, and you place it nearer the top of the picture and remove most of the sky and make more a feature of the river. And I think either of those two crops immediately kind of makes it a little bit more interesting. But depending on what you're doing, if you were to sort of, let's go with the idea of making more feature of the sky. The thing is, the sky is quite bright, and so it does grab a lot of the attention. So what I'd be tempted to do with something like this is let's just take the curves, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to curve it down and sort of really just create a little bit more drama in the sky, like that. Now, of course, the problem is with doing that is everything's become dark. So what I will do is I will mask that, or if I switch that, and I will now paint out, relighten, so that that darkness is only actually now applying to the top part of the screen and not the bottom. So if you go from, you can see that's the original, and then we darken the sky. And I think by darkening the sky, you automatically then make it that little bit more dramatic. If you were to go the other way, and let's flick back to open here, and let's crop it down the way, I would say you've got this large expansive river, but there's not a lot happening here. Now, you've got a boat on the river here, but it's kind of quite far back. And this is one of those things where I suppose timing, at the time you're focused on the building in the distance, so that's probably where you're taking the photo. But if you'd sort of hung on probably another minute, maybe 45 seconds or something like that, that boat would have been further forward. And I think if let me just show you, if I take that boat, copy that, paste it here, and then we can move it. Now, I might need to just make that a bit bigger. This is only very rough, of course. And what I will also do is just, so it doesn't get in the way, I'll just get rid of that one in the background, like that. So if we go back to here, and again, I'll just mask that. Oh, wasn't quite what I meant to do. Mask that. Yep, there we go. And just blend that in a little bit. I'm not looking for exactness, because really this is about a concept rather than an actual thing. And now we move this about. And what you can see is we've got this large expanse here, and if the boat had happened to be sort of something like that, ish, then you can now feel that actually, maybe I would move that over a little bit, say something like that. And then that way, in your kind of rule of thirds, just as the lit up building is at your sort of third of the way across, third of the way down from the top right, your boat is now a third of the way up and a third of the way in from the bottom left. So it kind of creates a balance. It sort of fills that space. It stops all this river being completely empty. So part of that then is about the timing of what you want to do. So in a way, what I suppose, going back to what I was talking about just a little bit earlier, which is, there's different ways you can approach this photo. It's not necessarily what I think is the best way to approach the photo. What I'm trying to do here is open up your thoughts to how you might have taken this photo different, or how you might have edited it differently. If you really actually, what you love about this is the texture in the sky, then you edit it the previous way I did. If what you really liked about it was the river, then to make a feature of the river, you need to have something in the river, or something to balance out. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas, something to play with, Prasad. And if you're about, let me know in the comments. However, I'm aware that I think, is it Dubai you're in? So several hours forward, might be past your bedtime. You might be watching this on catch up afterwards. Right, okay. So thank you for sending that one in. Hope you found that useful. So quick little flip back here. Any comments? Stacey says it's a learning curve. It certainly is. Okay. So moving on, what do we want to do next? I think what I was going to do next, VG. Yes. Okay. I want to talk about photos you did of your dad. Now, I'm not going to edit both of them, but I will just first of all, let's pull that up and flip over. So I've been chatting with VG a bit out with these podcasts. We've been talking a bit about light, and she took this photo of her father at home. Beautiful photo, beautiful warm smile. What I really like about this as well, though, in terms of the way VG is developing her photography, is that what she's got is she's started to develop layers of light. So she's using a 2-light setup, got a main light coming in from the right here, lighting up his face, then he falls into shadow, but then she's got another light over on the left, burning out a little bit on the forehead, but it's catching the edge of the face, and it creates a little bit more depth going on. Now, the second photo she took was this one. And there's something really engaging, I feel, about this one. What you've got is you've got a father, he's an artist, he's at work, probably looks like the kitchen table, I would guess, from the kettle in the background. And he's utterly absorbed in what he's doing. And again, what I like here is I like the fact that the light, because the light is coming from behind him, although his face is lost in shadow, there's some beautiful texture running across the side of the face. Now, so what I wanted to do with this one, though, was to talk about how we might set about editing something like this, because I think the core photo, the shape of it, the idea of it is engaging. I like it. I think I look at this photo and I'm immediately drawn to, here's a man, I can see the detail of his artwork, he's absorbed within it, he's obviously an older man with a life lived within the face, and it's really interesting. But what can we do to actually really enhance that in terms of editing? Now, one of the problems that I know you're up against is low light. And when I check the settings on your camera here, I see that you've got this at ISO 6400, which I'm thinking is pretty much probably about the limit of how far you can go. What this means is when we zoom in, it is very noisy. So, if I show you up here, you can see, cancel that. You can see that it's, this isn't just a grey wall, it's full of little kind of colour spots and dots, and that's commonly known as noise, which a high ISO setting creates. It's a counterbalance. You're offsetting about the fact that if there's not enough light, most cameras will allow you to increase the ISO and it lets more light in. It allows you to take a photo that isn't just completely lost in shadow, but the price you pay is you get a noisier photo, and that's the noise. Now, if you smooth that out, I mean, there are elements within different editing programs. So, for example, if I let's go into Camera Raw to show you what you would do here. So I can zoom in here. Now I have a little section over on the right. I've got some little sliders here which say detail, where you can sharpen, but if I sharpen, that actually makes the noise worse. Noise reduction. And so if I slide this along, and there's another colour noise, so I can get rid of the little kind of purple and green bits that are going on it. But if I slide that along and I take it along to a point whereby I've managed to get rid of most of that noise over here, and that's great, except now the whole face has become really blurred. So it's not really worked. You know, there's a limit to how far you can go. Maybe shrunk down, it sort of works a bit, but not really. The other thing you can do is convert it to black and white. And one of the things that happens with black and white is, although it's noise, it starts to look like grain, which is more or less, some people will bite my head off for saying this, but it's more or less the same kind of thing, but that you had in the old analog print photos. So when you took your photo with your camera, you went and got it developed. Before you started taking your photo, you bought a film. And the film had an ISO rating on it. An ISO 100 would be fine for bright days. An ISO 200 would give you a little bit more flexibility for sort of slightly less light. And an ISO 400 would allow you to shoot in lower light conditions, but wouldn't be quite so good for the high. And you could even occasionally get hold of things like an ISO 800, but that tends to be more specialist. And you were really for that using for indoor photography, but 400 and 800 ISO when you knew you were going to be shooting indoors under low light conditions. Now a lot of journalists were using these, or like music magazines, you know, so a lot of indoor shooting. So and then when they went into the magazines also had, you know, were printed and were made up of dots, and so we kind of grew up with a sense of black and white photos were allowed to have grain in a way that digital photography doesn't get away with noise in the same way. But as soon as you turn to black and white, it starts to emulate the idea of grain, and I think you can get away with it a bit more. It starts to by making it black and white. Well, it's now sort of becoming a little bit more timeless as well, and that's part of the thing that I like about, you know, this photo in the first place. You know, you've got the man painting that, and if it wasn't for a sort of slightly more modern kettle in the background, this could have been taken at any time in the last 70 years. The other advantage about black and white is we don't get caught up with the colour. You know, in the background we've got a bright red and yellow bag. We've also got some kind of packaging here. I don't know what that is, I'm sure you do. And these colours are taking our attention away from your father. So by desaturating, you can immediately see it stops those grabbing the attention. Now, we do still have a problem with the fact that there's not a lot of light on his face. So if I take the shadow slider and I bring that up, you can see that starts to give us more detail into the face and the shirt. Now, the other thing we've got is we've got a very bright wall behind him, which is kind of grabbing quite a lot of the attention. So I might take the highlights down a bit, but then what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a vignette. And a vignette is where you kind of darken around the top and you see, if I go the opposite way, it lightens up the top and bottom. I come down, it darkens the top and the bottom. And that's darkening down some of that, which again is drawing more of our attention into here. So what I might want to do here as well is I'm going to add a little bit of texture, which sharpens it up a bit, and a little bit of clarity, which is now creating more contrast. And now I hit OK. It's maybe still just a little bit dark. Wasn't quite what I wanted to do. Levels. So I'll just nudge that up a little bit like that. I've blown out the highlights on the head, so I will just bring them back in a little bit like that. It's very rough, but it gives you a sense of what's going on. So we've gone from that to that. And I think at this point, we've now got a photo which has that timeless feel to it. We can see more in his face, but we've still got the layers of light that's going on. Although the ISO is very high, because it's in black and white, it feels more like an old photo. And I think it kind of gets round some. I mean, of course, there are experts. We're not necessarily talking about competition winning, but if we are talking about improving the photo, I think, because I like the photo you started with, but obviously there's just too much shadow in the foreground and there are distractions of colour and brightness. So by editing it into black and white like this, I think it gives it more to play with. So that's what I would think about with VG. If you're playing with the editing, and you're shooting indoors, you're shooting high ISO, then go black and white. I also noticed with this you were shooting at a 250th of a second, which is quite a fast shoot. If he's not moving fast and your hands are kind of okay, I think you could slow that down. You could go to 125th of a second. That would give you a little bit more light as well, and maybe your ISO wouldn't need to be quite as high, but you play, experiment. So I hope that helps, VG. Right, okay, another quick flick back. What have we got? Prasad, nice suggestions, thanks. Oh, right, you are up, I'm glad. glad you saw that. VG, timeless is the word, thank you, I'm glad you're here, VG. Maggie, my wife, says beautiful photo of your father, and it is. Stacey, that looks beautiful. VG, thank you, Maggie. Lovely, great. Okay, well that's great. I like to see the chat going on in the comments as well. The chat between, it feels like it's not just me doing all the talking, but there's a bit more of a kind of community feel going on here. I mean, it's kind of what I like doing these podcasts. We're all in this together, so to speak. Anybody who's sitting here watching is here now, and if you're sitting watching the live version, then obviously we can't all be sitting in a room together, but on a virtual level, this is kind of the next best thing. So yeah, get the conversation going, chat with each other, help each other out as well. Right, okay, what I want to do now is I'll go to Graham, I think, and just close that image there. Now what Graham did was he sent me this initial photo with and what Graham said was, some critique please, sky, water, lacking definition, what could I have done to improve the image? I'm sure there's lots, but 1 or 2 pointers would be appreciated. Now I noticed he'd already edited it, converting it to black and white, so I did ask if he could send me the original, which he did, and is that going to allow me to, there we go. So that's the edited version. That's the original he sent me. So I will just open that in Photoshop. Now, so I then asked him sort of more what he was after. And Graham said, I had a quick play with it on my phone with it as a low-res JPEG, preferring it in black and white. It's not a great shot, but I know it could be doing better. It was the contrast and tonal range in the background between the hills, really, but I didn't have time to set up the shot properly, still learning how to use the camera as well. Okay, I think really, Graham, the tricky bit here is the lighting is one of the first things. And, there's no doubt, the problem is this is a dull day. And I think what we're up against here is the problem that we all face so often, which is, for us, we're standing there, edge of the loch, or edge of the lake, I think you said it was Windermere. So you're standing at the edge of the lake, and you can hear the water, you can feel the wind on your face, you can smell the temperature, you can see the clouds moving. You're aware of being in the great outdoors. And it's lovely. And you can see the hills, and the hills are layering back into the distance. And so you whip out your camera, you take a photo, and the photo just isn't doing it justice at all. It isn't conveying the emotions and the senses which you were feeling at the time. And part of the problem we have here is something whereby, which is about the lacking of the camera. It doesn't matter what camera you had. You could have had a £30,000 Hasselblad super camera for this, and you would have still been under the same problems of the same dull light restrictions. So with the fact that there's not a lot you can do about the light, what you really then have to concentrate on is line and form, and texture. And so you talk about the tonal gradations. My first thought with this is, again, similarly to Prasad's picture in Austria, is that we've got all this water down below and we've got all this sky above, which isn't really doing anything. It's also very slightly tilted, and those who watch these regularly will know I get a little bit OCD about that, so I just want to kind of tilt that a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Feel happy with a level horizon. But, I get more tempted, what if we sort of bring that down and we were to bring that up? Now we've ended up, and really at that point it's getting a bit square, which isn't really suiting it either. So what I find I want to do is I want to sort of stretch it out. Would this have looked better if it was landscape? And I'll do a content aware fill here. So that means the computer is just going to artificially fill in the gaps. It's making it up. It's not going to be absolutely exact, but it gives us a sense of what was going on. You see, and now I think you actually end up with a slightly more interesting shape. But the next thing that really leaps to mind here, Graham, is that set of trees in the foreground, this little island here. Where are we? This, because it's closer to us, is darker, and basically just becomes, it sort of draws all the attention. And it draws all the attention without necessarily giving us the satisfaction of having. Now, if there was a little castle sitting there, that would be interesting. Maybe if there was a boat, maybe if there was a fire, maybe if there was a giant goose. If you're going to have something sort of in the middle of the photo, and it's not just, if I go back to that here, it's still absolutely dominating. In some ways, you've got a couple of ducks or geese, I think they're ducks, here in the foreground. That kind of a little bit more interesting, and you could maybe have got down a bit lower, allowed them to be in the foreground. But having said that, we go back to this bit, which is really, you were interested in the background. And for that, if we look into the background here, we've got the light. So I suppose that if you want the background, we're back to this notion of the sky and the water are pretty much getting it. We only need enough water to know that you're at the loch, the lakeside, and we only need enough sky to know that it's a mountain range. So we'll just go back to this. And then we're kind of, could we do more with that? But we can play with a contrast. So again, let's just go to camera or filter. Again, given the dullness, the part of the problem here is, I suppose, if I take the curves and I do this kind of adjustment to it, it makes things stand out a bit more, but the colours go really quite maybe at this point, you go black and white with that as well. If the light isn't there to make the colours interesting, let's lose the colours. Now, you did that in your original edit, so I can see why you were doing that. But we have got a dullness in the background here. So at that point, maybe what we're really looking for is to, again, increase the texture a little bit, take the clarity, and maybe we're sort of doing something a bit more like this. Maybe even stick a little bit of vignette in to sort of draw the edges in to the side. And now I think we're maybe ending up with a slightly more dramatic thing. I do still feel that the trees here in the foreground are too strong. And let me just, actually what I'll do, if I will just do a little bit of cloning here, where I'll just randomly take a little bit of coastline at the back there and get rid of at least half the tree. It's there. Okay, we've got more boats being included, but don't worry about that. And I think immediately you can see then that that stops dominating as much. I mean, if we took it out completely, it then doesn't become a part of it, although we are now sort of missing something in the foreground, and maybe that's where your ducks come back in. So a lot of it, Graham, I think really is, part of it's the composition. You've got to understand that while you were looking at the hills in the background, that clump of trees in the foreground was really making itself felt. So maybe moving around, maybe zooming in. But I think, to be honest, your real problem essentially is the light. It's one of these things whereby you kind of need to go back on a different day, I think. Or, you know, again, there's only so much you kind of can do. I mean, if I repeat what I did last, give the vignette, the camera's struggling here. It's now, or the computer's struggling. It's become light, artificially light, just behind these trees here. So to get the tonal range, you just need better light. And if you were to be there golden hour, if you were to be there when the sun is low in the sky, hitting the edge of the hills, then I think you would get a much better sense of the depth and the space in that. So I don't really know whether I've managed to help too much, other than maybe give you some pointers. Try and be aware of what's in the foreground. Be aware. It comes really back to what I was saying earlier, which is, what is it you wanted? What is it, when you were standing by the side of the lake, why did you pull your camera out? Why did you think this is a shot worth taking? What was it that you wanted to capture? And what was it you wanted to try and convey to other people with the idea that you would use that photo to show others? I mean, fine, you can take a photo and the only thing you're doing is a memory for yourself. But it's really important that idea, I'm taking a photo because I might want to put this on Facebook, I might want to show my wife, or I might want to show it to Kim. What is it that was grabbing your attention? And if you can clearly identify that at the point you're taking the photo, then it becomes easier to look at the elements within the photo and say what's helping that and what's getting in the way of that. So if what I'm really interested in is those mountains in the background, what's in the foreground that's taking my attention away from it? If I'm really interested in these ducks in the foreground, what's in the background that's taking my attention away from it? If I'm trying to get a sense of the water lapping at the shore, would I be better off sort of getting down low at the point whereby the ripples are hitting the shore and trying to see if I can capture something with that? So understand as best as you can. It's just that asking that little question, and this is for anybody watching, at any point you're going to take the photo, asking yourself the question, as you pull the camera up, why? Why am I taking this photo? What is it that I want to capture? And actually it's that saying it out loud bit. There is a reason. You pulled that camera out because there's something there that you want. And if you can identify that, then it makes everything that comes after that, the angle you place the camera at, the camera settings you use, the lens you decide to use, what you decide to focus on and what you decide not to focus on, what you include and what you don't include, all have a dramatic, become much easier to work out once you understand what it is that you wanted to convey. So, I hope that helps there, Graham. Right. Okay. Where are we at? So Rosie's come in. Hi, hello from the Isle of Whithorn. I'm enjoying your podcast. Thanks. Hey, Rosie, glad you could make it. And Paul, hi, Rosie. So hi, hi, Paul. I know you're here too. Maggie, I love hearing about other people's lives. We don't hear eastern box turtles much in southwest Scotland. I've missed a bit. Okay. Scroll back a bit more. Stacey, I was going to send a photograph. Busy weekend with lawn cutting the backyard and finding an eastern box turtle. Right. Okay. So this is true. You just don't get eastern box turtles here in Dumfries and Galloway while you're cutting your back lawn. So that's good. Okay. Stacey's talking a little bit more about that, about being a palm of her hand size. Okay, that's cool. Right. Okay, so what I'm going to do now then is we'll move on to the final image or set of images that I was to talk about this evening, which come from Stephen Ross. Now, Stephen sent me a little set of images. I'm only going to look at one because, again, there's sort of... otherwise we could be here all night. So what Stephen sent me was there was this one, and then this one, and then he did a black and white version of it, slight sepia tone, and another photo where, you know, it's at an angle. So I asked him to send me originals, and he sent me this as the original of this one. So you can see here how Steve has first of all set up the photo. Oh, sorry, let's get rid of the Canadian geese. Canadian geese. Why did I call it Canadian geese? Is that because that's what Canada geese, Windermere? That's what Graham called the photo. Right, okay. Fair enough. So they weren't ducks, they were Canada geese. Right. So, yes, back to Steve's pictures. And so we can see this was Steve's original photo, and this is the way he decided to edit it. Now, as we know, I've talked about already, I am a fan of creating the dramatic photos, the cinematic, the theatrical. It's staged narrative photography, where unlike most of the stuff we've been looking at so far, which is about capture photography, whereby what you're doing is you're seeing a scene and or you know, whether that's from a flower or a box turtle or mountains in the distance or a city scene over the river, or even your father doing artwork at the kitchen table. You see a scene and then you are trying to capture your best version of it. Created scenes are where you set everything up. You say, well, I'm not going to wait for all the conditions to be right. I'm going to put them there. And in this case, he's using a model and he's using himself, and he's set up lights, and then, you know, so he's emulating, he's got an idea and he's decided to go for it. So let's see what Steve says. Steve says, this was a shoot we did just before lockdown. That explains why you can get away with the lack of social distancing. Become so aware of it now. I keep watching films on TV that were made last year or the year before, and you just think, everybody's too close. What are they doing? Where are the masks? Product of our time. The idea was to create a kind of classic horror movie feel, mostly done with muted colours and a sepia layer. The square one was a go at a different method to create a kind of harsher light and reveal a bit of personality of the characters. Is there a better way of getting that celluloid feel, and how else might I edit to tell the story better? So, Steve did send me a couple of the originals. I've decided that for the sake of it, I'm just going to play around with one. So this is the one I'm going to play around with. So first of all, let's just open that in Photoshop. Now, as a raw photo, not done much. It's not feeling totally balanced. Steve and his model are sitting in the middle, and so You see, immediately when you go cinematic, I start to think you want more of a kind of movie feel. You want that widescreen effect, you see. And so you would kind of pull that down here and maybe pull that up here. But if we do that, what we immediately notice is there's a great big space over on the right. And really what I would want is everything sort of nudged over to the right a bit. So again, if I was sort of doing this, I would want to sort of have it a little bit further over, something like that. And again, I'll use content aware just to fill in. Won't do it exact, but it gives us a sense of, just to, you can't see it behind there, but if I show you here, it's doubled up all these tools and lengthened out the legs. Doesn't really matter. What I'm just trying to do here is go for a rough shape. Now, you didn't have that, so you then went for a square crop. Now, the problem is with the square crop is it immediately stops it feeling cinematic. Cinematic, you either want widescreen. Having said that, a lot of these old 1930s black and white Frankenstein Dracula photos weren't really that widescreen. They were more a kind of 2:3 ratio. So you can kind of get away with that. However, there's something, the big thing that I really want to talk about with these, Stephen, is most of these photos, what you've got, when I look at your edit here, it's very, very dark. And I think it's one of these cases whereby what you've got in your head isn't actually what was the case. We have this thing, right? If you think then Frankenstein, Dracula, 1930s horror films, they're all dark, moody and shadowy. Absolutely they are. We all have these memories of these deep black shadows of Dracula or Frankenstein's monster coming out of those shadows and frightening the life out of us and frightening the life out of their victims. And of course, it's all really dark, black and moody. Except, is it? I'm going to show you something. I went away and I did a little bit of research here just for you. And let me show you a couple of photos. Frankenstein's monster. Boris Karloff there in all his makeup, 1931. And yes, lots of shadow, but you see, there's light at the back here. Let's go on, let's click on to the next one. This one's from Bride of Frankenstein. Yes, lots of dark shadows, dark lit, it looks like they're illuminate. Oh, sorry. Come back here, go. What have I done? Okay, try again. Yeah, Bride of Frankenstein. That's the button I need, yeah. They look like they're lit by the candles. They're not, because there's the candlelight and this guy has got light coming from behind. He is lit up, he is lit up in places. You've got the background is all lit up here. This foreground is all lit up here. The shadows are, the light isn't quite cast right on his face. So they're emulating the idea of it being lit by candlelight, but it isn't. It's lit by big Hollywood lights. But it's not just the way it's lit. If you look in the background, there's a whole section of light behind the shadow. Let's move along here. Right, okay. Victor Frankenstein confronts the monster. We've got light behind the rocks. What about inside the laboratory itself? You can see light behind the pillar. You can see light, a streak of light coming down over on the left there. There's lots of light going on. Now there's lots of shadow, but there's a lot of light as well. And these extra levels of light and dark are really what's making a difference. So here we go, on the table. Machines in the background lit up. This chain coming down, creating a level of light in the darkness. There's even bits of light in the back here. Let's go on to onto Dracula. And again, dark, moody, point where Jonathan Harker pricks himself with blood. Dracula gets all a bit excited about it. There's light in the background. Here we go, in the ruins of the castle. But there's moonlight coming through the window. Here there's a shaft of light coming down as he's coming down the stairwell. So when we come back to this then, Stephen, what we find is you've got the light on the monster, on the creation. There's not a lot of light on your face, and yet always within these movies, there was always light on the face. This notion of, even if it was drifting into the background, his face was always lit up. There are other pictures of Dracula where even just the eyes are lit. The eyes are really important to be lit up. So what I think the real problem here is a lack of the layering of light. And what I'm going to talk about, in one of the earlier, quite early on in the series of podcasts, and if you go to the YouTube channel, I think on the button to the bite-size bit, I've even got I want you to go and look up the bit where I talk about backlight. Light behind the subject separates it out from the background, and it makes a dramatic difference. And if you want to talk about creating a cinematic feel, then having a backlight can make quite a bit of difference. Even in daylight, if you remember the photos that I showed right at the beginning of this podcast of Piper and Ella Booth, we were in daylight, but I still had a light behind them because it just created an extra layer which separated them from the background. So let's go back then to this picture. There is another thing actually that I will just point out, which is the other thing that's happening in a lot of these old movies is it's a shallower depth of focus, a shallower depth of field. If you look at the monster here, he's fine, he's sharp, but the background is a little bit out of focus. Further away, you're not getting the same thing, but closer up shots, and this is kind of probably an equivalent distance shot as yours. But you can see the machinery in the background is out of focus. Here we've got, Dracula's in focus, and at such a narrow depth, not only is the background in focus, but the guy in the front is slightly out of focus as well. So if you actually want to seriously emulate the old 1930s kind of Hollywood look to it, then go for a shallower depth of field as well. Make sure you're only playing around with something like nothing more than probably an f4 or 4.5, possibly less if you can manage it. So when we come back to here, you're clearly playing with quite a, what have we got here? Let me just, okay, no, the image you sent me doesn't have the EXIF information, so I don't actually know what your settings were with that. But I'm guessing it's probably something more like an F80, F11 or even more, because if we look at the background here, you've got a cloth in the background, which is really quite detailed. And if you add a softer thing in the background, I think that would sort of make it more interesting. So let's just play with something here for a moment. Let me just show you. I'm going to do a little kind of quick selection. I'll select you and your monster. Try and leave the background out of it. Let's get a little bit more of you up here. Okay, and it's not going to be absolutely perfect, but it'll do for the sake of what we're doing here. So now what I want to do is I'm going to create, I think I want to do that kind of mask, so that I'm going to blur the background but leave the people in the foreground. So if I filter, blur, Gaussian blur, oh, wrong one. So I'm blurring the mask now. So let's put this in the right place. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. So I can blur it a little bit. I can blur it a little bit more, so that it's just a little bit more out of focus, and it's not then grabbing the attention in the way that it was. Maybe zoom in a little bit more so you can see this. You see the texture, which is softening down that texture a little bit. Now, the other thing, of course, we want to do with this is maybe put it in black and white. Oh, now I would say just a little point about where you were doing a couple in sepia or with a sepia tone, is again that's a sort of slight mistake. Sepia for old photos, but old films weren't in sepia. Old films are black and white, so I think you're probably better off sticking in black and white than you were with than going into sepia. And the fact is, if you were doing sepia to emulate old photos, you wouldn't have action shots in the same way, because those old kind of glass plate photos tended to be, they would take sort of 4-second, 8-second, 12-second exposures. That's why everybody's sort of sitting very still and formal for the most part. You don't tend to get action shots in. So when you've got your dramatic picture here, although I know you're posing for it, it's taking the idea that we're capturing him in the middle of an action, and I think that it's about just getting if you want to emulate that notion of the kind of Victorian Edwardian photo, then you need to put the other bits in place with it. And if you're trying to go for the film photo, then you get the tropes, get the things that work with it, and then see all these things, whether you black and white or it's sepia or it's levels of depth of focus, all these things are shortcut language for the viewer to immediately leap into the place you want to take them. Obviously this isn't the 1930s, obviously you're not creating a monster, you're creating a story. And because you're creating a story, but you're emulating that idea, you're wanting people to look at it and immediately be reminded of these old wonderful Frankenstein, Dracula horror films. So the more you can use the language of those films, the more your viewer is going to get it and get into the place more quickly. So when we go back to here, like I say, black and white probably works better. But your face is very dark here. So first thing I am going to do is I'm going to lighten your face. Let's bring that up a little bit, maybe a little bit more highlights in your beard and hair, a little bit more. Can I bring out a little bit more in her hair? It's kind of tricky. Okay. You can see that immediately, I think, makes it a little bit more interesting, bringing your face back into view here. Now, background, like I say, it's it's very dark. I'm going to darken it a little bit more. So if I get a curves level, but I just attach it purely to this one behind, it means we'll just darken the background a little. I mean, if we brighten it up, it doesn't quite look right at all because it's cloth that was never meant to be part of it. But okay, let's just go with that for the moment. The real bit that I want to show you here now is what I was talking about, the notion of light in the background. And when you look at those, those films, whether it's that, that first one we were looking at of Frankenstein here, there's a shaft of light in the background. We have, similarly, we've got, obviously, there's much more light going on in that one, and there's a very deliberate shaft of light casting a shadow on that one. But that notion that there's always some bit of light going on in the background, and sometimes when you don't have, an actual thing being lit up, that idea of a shaft of light can kind of create an extra sense of depth. So what I'm going to do here is I'm creating an extra layer. I'm going to take a white paintbrush. I'm going to take it up and I'm going to soften it. Rather than being at 100%, I'll take that down to about, 35%. And I want you to watch carefully what happens when I put a line across it. Now, do you see that? Do you see that suddenly there is, we get drawn into an extra. Now maybe that's just a little bit light. I will take that down a little bit. Yeah, something like that. Let's do that. And we've got a whole new level of texture. There's a background in there which suddenly makes you feel that this is happening within the room, the space. Let's undo those. I mean, I was scooping left to right. You could just as easily do right to left. Okay, let's just take that down to 30, say 30%, 26%. Do something like that. A couple of little lines of light. Maybe these don't even need to be quite as large. Undo that. Just take down the size of the brush a bit. Or make it so it's sort of not even. But it's that notion that if you kind of create a layer, that extra layer of light, you've now got an extra sense of depth. And I really think, Stephen, that, I love the way you are being creative, and you are, it's right up my street. I love doing these kind of things. But I think you've got to understand backlight, understand the fact that, it's a trick. It's a trick. We have in our memories, these were all dark, shadowy things. But you only truly understand the dark and shadowy because of the contrast of the way the light is. And if you look at the way they are lit, there is always something going on in the background, pretty much. There's one or two exceptions where there is literally only a headshot of Bela Lugosi coming straight out, or of Boris Karloff coming straight out of the shadows, and you really are headlit, and it is a black back. But then normally what happens is you find the eyes are lit up as he comes forward out of the darkness. But almost any sense whereby you're standing this far back, where you've got a kind of mid-shot torso and more, there's always something going on in the background. Go and, just go to Google Images, type in 1931 black and white horror film, stuff like that, and find screenshots. And then that way, use the Pinterest board, as we were talking earlier. Collect the images and use the tricks that they are using. Study how they were done. Look at the way they use light as well as the shadow. And then figure out how to copy that. And then, if you copy that and place it into your photos, then they really are going to have all the mood and the atmosphere of those wonderful old classic films. So I hope that helps. And just to say on this one here again, I suppose if you wanted to go for more that kind of two-thirds crop, what would we do? If that's 240 millimeters high, so if we go to 350 odd there and move it to something like that, that gives you sort of slightly more. Some of them are even slightly squarer, or something like that, but you still have a little bit of light in the background, and it still lifts it out. Because let me just show you again, if I just remove that, you can see the depth. So whatever ratio you want to do it, I think, but it's understand that light. So I hope that helps, Steve. It was fun playing around with your photo. Thank you for sending me the original to play with. Right, okay, so let's see what else we've got here. I've got a few more comments here. Stephen says he too models, right? Stacey, love those old B movies, and have seen those photographs, very old films, 30s and 40s. Bela Lugosi, interesting photograph from Fiji, great outputs. Wow, made a big difference. Love that. This is the problem, you see, you're all going, wow, love that. This is incredible. Wow, how good is that? I'm not entirely sure what points you were saying that, because I'm not watching these comments come up live. But I enjoy the praise. Thank you. VG, Manoj, you have got to watch this. Oh, well, that's high praise indeed. Drag somebody else over to watch them. Right, well, that's pretty much it for this episode. I hope you found that interesting. If you would like to support these podcasts, then there's buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, where you can make contributions that are always appreciated. Stephen's just come back in. That was fantastic advice. Thanks very much. I'm glad, Stephen. Good. Next week. Next week is the day after my wife and I's 25th. My wife and my 25th wedding anniversary. So our silver wedding anniversary next Monday. So on a Tuesday, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put up some. It's going to sound terrible. I'm going to put up photos of my wife, but my wife is an artist. Maggie Ayres, go and look her up. It's amazing work, and there's been a couple of times when I've done photos for her, just as I would photograph any other artist or creative. And but there's an extra level when you are photographing somebody who knows you incredibly well, which I'd like to talk about. But as well as showing you and talking you through some of the reasons and the ways I went about taking some of the photos that I've done for Maggie. So that'll be next week. That's me. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week. And if you want to get your photos in, I will say that put them in earlier if you can. If you're interested, if you would like some feedback or you would like some help with the sticking points of your own photos, you would like to ask particular questions, then make sure you've joined the group Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres if you haven't already, and put your photos in. There, at the moment so far, the number of photos I've had coming in has kind of been about the same. It's usually about 4 or 5 and I go through them in the evening, but really 5 is pretty much about the limit I can do. So there will start to come a kind of sort of first come first served basis. So if there's get your images in sooner rather than later. It also gives me a little bit more time to explore. So for example, like the photos with Stephen, it gave me the excuse to go off and start looking up photos of old 1930s horror films, which was quite a bit of fun. But just to illustrate the point. And I can do more things like that if I've got a little bit more time in order to be able to help you create the photos that you wish to have. Enjoy the rest of your week, and see you next Tuesday. Cheerio.